I always thought my life was simple, maybe even boring to anyone on the outside. But to me, boring was good. Boring meant my daughter, Lily, was safe. Boring meant I could get through a day at Willow Creek Elementary teaching third graders, come home, make macaroni and cheese, and hear Lily's laugh bounce through the walls of our small but warm apartment. Lily was 7, with curls that never stayed brushed no matter how many times I tried in the morning. Her eyes, wide and curious, carried a spark that sometimes made me forget how young she really was. She had this way of asking questions that stopped me in my tracks. Like the night she asked, Mom, if you had to choose between chocolate cake and me, what would you pick? I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the dish towel. You, obviously, I told her. But you better not make me prove it. Those were the kinds of nights I lived for, quiet, silly, ordinary. Still, single motherhood was heavy. Some nights, when Lily was asleep, I sat in the kitchen staring at my lesson plans, the hum of the fridge filling the silence, wondering if I was enough. Was I giving her what she needed? Could I keep this balance forever? I didn't let her see those cracks. She deserved a mom who felt steady. That's where Sandra Miller came in. Sandra lived 2 floors down in our complex. She was in her late 40s, divorced, no kids of her own. The kind of woman who wore her blonde hair pulled tight, always smelled faintly of cinnamon, and somehow knew everything about everyone in the building. She had fostered kids before, and people in the neighborhood called her the reliable one. When I first met her, she brought over a casserole dish and said, "Single moms need allies." And she proved it, at least in the beginning. She picked Lily up from school when I got stuck late at work. She sat with her during sick days when I couldn't take off. She even helped Lily with her science fair project one year. I trusted her. I wanted to. Trust was a luxury for someone in my position. Mark Dawson, my colleague at Willow Creek, teased me about it once. We were stacking graded math quizzes in the staff room when he said, "You sure this neighbor of yours isn't secretly plotting to take over your life?" I rolled my eyes. Please. Sandra's harmless. She's practically family. I believed that with all my heart. At night, when I tucked Lily in, I'd hear her mumbling stories Sandra had told her, stories about the kids she'd fostered, about adventures from when she was young. I never minded. If anything, I felt grateful that Lily had someone else she trusted. Someone else who could be there when I couldn't. Back then, I thought Sandra was a blessing. Back then, I thought the routine we had was safe, unshakable. I had no idea how quickly trust could turn into betrayal. The first sign was small, almost easy to brush off. One Thursday afternoon, Lily came home buzzing with excitement. "Mom, guess what? I'm in ballet now," she shouted, twirling in the living room, her backpack still on her shoulders. I frowned, confused. "Ballet? Honey, when did we talk about ballet?" "Sandra signed me up. We start Saturday." My stomach tightened. I called Sandra that evening, trying to keep my tone even. "Hey, listen, thanks for caring, but you really should have asked me before signing Lily up for something." Sandra laughed lightly, like I was being silly. "Aurora, it's ballet, not a tattoo." Lily loved the idea. "You've been so busy, I figured I'd help lighten the load." I let it go. Maybe because I was tired, maybe because I wanted to believe her intentions were pure. But after that, little things started adding up. At the grocery store, Sandra corrected me in front of Lily when I picked up cereal. "Too much sugar. She doesn't need that." At the school pickup line, she waved at the other parents like she was the mom. And one night, when Lily scraped her knee, Sandra bent down and said, "Don't worry, sweet girl. Mommy's here." I froze. Mommy? I told myself she just slipped up, that it was a term of comfort. Still, the word echoed in my head long after Lily was asleep. Then came the letter. It was a manila envelope with the county seal, tucked into my mailbox like a snake waiting to bite. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, a court summons. Sandra Miller was filing for guardianship of Lily. Guardianship. The world tilted. I dropped the papers on the counter and had to sit before my knees gave out. My eyes scanned the lines over and over, but the words didn't change. Sandra claimed I was an unfit mother. That I worked too many hours, that Lily lacked stability, that she'd been the one providing consistent care. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked tight as if someone had chained it shut. That night, when Lily tugged at my sleeve asking if we could watch cartoons before bed, I forced a smile and nodded. My voice betrayed nothing. But inside, I was already drowning. Later, I stormed down 2 flights of stairs, papers clutched in my hand, and pounded on Sandra's door. She opened it calmly, like she'd been waiting for me. "How could you?" I hissed. Sandra tilted her head, lips curling in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Aurora, this is for Lily's best interest. You're overwhelmed. Everyone sees it. You think you can steal my daughter?" Her eyes glittered coldly. "I think the court might agree she deserves more than what you can give." I stood there, trembling, realizing for the first time that Sandra wasn't a blessing. She was a predator. I spent the next morning at a lawyer's office downtown, a sterile place that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer ink. The man behind the desk wore a suit that fit too well, his words rolling out in polished disinterest. "Ms. Carter, cases like these can be difficult. Sandra Miller has been a licensed foster parent before, correct?" "Yes, but that doesn't give her the right." He held up a hand. "Courts often side with stability. If she's established a routine with your daughter, that could work against you. I'd advise gathering as much proof of your primary caregiving as possible. But you should be prepared. This won't be cheap." I walked out numb, my head buzzing with numbers I couldn't afford. Retainers, hourly rates, things Sandra probably knew would bury me. At school, it felt like whispers followed me through the hallways. Parents lingered at pickup, their eyes darting between me and Sandra, who stood at the edge of the parking lot with her arms folded, chatting like she owned the place. I caught snippets, unfit, poor Lily, and each one felt like a dagger. That night, Lily sat at the table, doodling on construction paper. "Sandra says she can teach me to bake bread. Real bread, not the kind in bags." I swallowed hard. "That's nice, honey. But remember, I'm your mom. Some things only I get to teach you." She looked at me like she didn't quite understand. Why would she? She was 7. To her, this was just a game between 2 adults who both cared. When I told Mark about the summons, his jaw tightened. "You know Sandra's got connections at county services, right? She's fostered before, she knows how to spin a story. She'll play the savior card." I pressed my forehead to the cool staff room window, fighting tears. "What am I supposed to do, Mark? She's twisting everything." I trusted her. He put a hand on my shoulder, firm. "Then you need to play smarter than her. Don't let her see you panic." But panic was all I felt. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I pulled out the old photo albums I'd kept since she was born. Hospital wristbands taped to pages, first steps scribbled in my handwriting, daycare notes signed with my initials. Proof that I'd been there. Proof of my promise. I remembered my mother's words the day Lily was born, when she held her granddaughter for the first time. "Aurora, no matter how hard life gets, you fight for her. Always fight for her." I had brushed it off back then, too wrapped in exhaustion and joy. Now those words clawed at me, louder than Sandra's smug smile, louder than the whispers in the parking lot. Sandra wanted a fight? She'd get one. The courthouse in Willow Creek wasn't grand, not like the ones you see in movies. It was a squat brick building with too many fluorescent lights and a faint smell of mildew, but when I walked through its heavy glass doors that morning, it felt like the walls were closing in. Lily was at school, blissfully unaware. I'd kissed her forehead at drop-off, forcing cheer into my voice. "Be good today, honey. I'll pick you up after class." She smiled and ran off with her backpack bouncing, while my heart cracked open inside my chest. Now, in the courtroom, I sat at a scratched wooden table with a public defender who barely looked older than my students. His tie was crooked, his folder thin. Across from us, Sandra sat with her attorney, an older man with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Sandra herself looked polished, almost angelic. A pale blue blazer, pearls at her throat, hands folded neatly in her lap. She even smiled at me like we were just neighbors sharing a morning coffee. The bailiff called the case. Miller versus Carter. The judge entered, robe swishing, face unreadable. He was middle-aged, weary-looking, the kind of man who'd seen 1,000 cases just like this. He scanned the file in front of him as if deciding, before we even spoke, how this would go. Sandra's lawyer opened first. His voice was smooth, steady. "Your Honor, this case is about the well-being of a child. My client, Ms. Miller, has provided consistent and stable care for young Lily Carter while her mother has struggled with long work hours, financial instability, and a lack of reliable support." He gestured toward me like I was a chart on the wall. "The child has bonded with Ms. Miller. She views her as a maternal figure. We are not asking to remove Ms. Carter entirely from her daughter's life, but we believe legal guardianship with Ms. Miller would ensure stability, structure, and emotional continuity for Lily." The words were daggers dressed in velvet. My defender shuffled his papers, cleared his throat, and muttered something about me being a dedicated teacher, a loving mother. He pointed to my employment record, my clean background, but his arguments were thin. Sandra's lawyer dismantled them easily, smiling politely as he painted me as exhausted, overwhelmed, stretched too thin to raise a child alone. When Sandra took the stand, she spoke with practiced grace. "Aurora is a good woman," she said, her voice dripping with false kindness, "but she's overwhelmed. I've stepped in many times to make sure Lily had what she needed: rides to school, meals, emotional support. Lily even calls me mommy sometimes. Not because I told her to, but because she feels that bond." Her eyes shimmered, and I swear she pinched her arm to force tears. The judge leaned forward, watching her carefully, and I wanted to scream. When it was my turn, my voice shook. I talked about Lily's first steps, about staying up all night when she had the flu, about reading her favorite bedtime stories until my throat was sore. But each word felt small under the weight of Sandra's performance. The judge didn't rule that day. He said the case warranted further hearings, investigations, evaluations. But it was clear where the momentum leaned. He ordered a temporary arrangement. Sandra could continue to spend significant time with Lily until the next court date. It felt like a punch to the stomach. I left the courthouse dizzy, clutching the railing as if the whole world tilted. Outside, Sandra walked past me, her lawyer murmuring something in her ear. She caught my eye and smiled sweetly. "Don't take this personally, Aurora. I only want what's best for her." I wanted to lunge at her, to tear the mask right off her face, but my knees nearly gave out. I sat on the courthouse steps, head in my hands, watching strangers walk past as though nothing in the world had changed. But mine had. At school, whispers grew louder. Parents avoided me in the pickup line, gravitating towards Sandra, who stood tall, greeting them like she already wore the crown. One mother muttered, not as quietly as she thought, "It's a shame. Poor Lily deserves stability." And then Lily, sweet, innocent Lily, looked up at me one evening as we sat on the couch. "Sandra says she's my mom too. Is that true?" The words sliced deeper than any knife. I forced a smile, kissed her curls, and whispered, "No, honey. You only have one mom. That's me. But my throat burned, and my heart broke as I held her tighter than ever. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, papers spread before me, hands shaking. Sandra had turned my trust into a weapon, and the system seemed to be sharpening the blade for her. The walls of the apartment, once warm and safe, felt suffocating. It hit me then, I couldn't rely on the courts alone. Sandra was playing a game, and she was winning. If I wanted to keep Lily, I'd have to learn the rules. And then I'd have to break them. The morning after the first hearing, I woke to silence. No birds outside, no traffic on the street. Just silence. It felt like the world had pressed pause, waiting to see if I'd crumble. But I didn't. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and spread the court papers in front of me. My hands still trembled, but my mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in weeks. If Sandra wanted to play games, then I'd play too. Only I'd play better. The first step was proof. Not vague memories, not teary speeches about love, actual proof. I pulled out the shoebox I'd kept since Lily was born. Inside were journals, receipts, daycare notes, doctor's forms. Every milestone, every fever, every scraped knee I'd written down in messy handwriting at 2 a.m. I'd done it because I wanted to remember, but now those messy scrawls were ammunition. I stacked them on the table, page after page. First steps, June 4, 2018. Fell toward couch. Cried, then laughed. My handwriting, my notes. Proof that I was there. That I'd always been there. Next, I dug through my phone, scrolling back through years of text messages. There they were, dozens of times Sandra had begged to babysit. I don't mind watching her tonight if you're swamped. Drop her at my place, I'll take care of dinner. Anytime you need, Aurora, I'm here. I screenshotted them all, sending copies to my email in case anything mysteriously disappeared later. I moved on to my work files. As a teacher, I'd kept meticulous time cards, attendance records, and lesson plans. They showed not only that I worked, but also that I structured my hours around Lily's needs, leaving early when she was sick, using personal days for doctor visits. Each piece clicked into place like a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been building for years. But the most dangerous piece came from outside my apartment. Mark found me in the staff room that afternoon, where I sat surrounded by papers and a half-eaten sandwich. He leaned against the counter, watching me with quiet concern. "You're digging," he said. "I'm proving," I corrected. His lips twitched in a half-smile. "Good. Because you'll need it. Sandra's got friends in the county. She's pulled this kind of stunt before, always skirts just short of losing her license." I froze. Before? With who? He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "A friend of mine works in social services. Off the record, she told me Sandra had a warning 2 years ago. Another foster kid complained about her. It didn't stick, Sandra talked her way out of it, but there's a file somewhere." My heart kicked into overdrive. "Can your friend help me find it?" Mark nodded slowly. "I'll ask. But be careful, Aurora. If Sandra smells what you're doing, she'll tighten her grip." That night, after Lily went to bed, I opened my laptop and created a folder titled The Case. I filled it with scanned journals, screenshots, receipts, lesson plans. Each file named, dated, cross-referenced. I built binders, blue for medical, red for school, green for personal logs. It felt obsessive. It felt paranoid. But it also felt like control, and I needed that more than air. A week later, Mark slipped me a manila envelope at school. "From my friend," he whispered. Inside was a copy of a report, an official complaint from a 15-year-old foster girl who had lived with Sandra. The girl claimed Sandra belittled her, told her she wasn't wanted, threatened to send her back into the system. The report ended with a note, warning issued. Case closed. Sandra had buried it. But now, I had it. I stared at the document for hours that night, fingers tracing the girl's words. It wasn't enough to prove abuse, but it was enough to paint a picture. Enough to show Sandra wasn't the saint she pretended to be. Still, the thought gnawed at me, Sandra was clever. She'd twist this too, make herself the victim. If I was going to win, I needed something undeniable. Something she couldn't spin. That's when fate handed me a gift. One Saturday, I stopped by the corner cafe for coffee after dropping Lily at ballet, the class Sandra had forced her into. Sandra was there, sitting with a friend, her voice carrying across the small space. I froze when I heard my name. She doesn't stand a chance, Sandra said, laughing softly. Courts always trust me. Aurora's drowning. I'll have guardianship by summer. My blood turned to fire. She wasn't whispering. She was boasting. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and hit record. Every word, every smug laugh, every drop of venom, captured. I walked out of that cafe shaking, not from fear this time, but from fury. For the first time in weeks, I felt powerful. Back at home, I sat on the couch with Lily curled against me, watching cartoons. I kissed the top of her head and whispered so softly she couldn't hear, "She has no idea who she's messing with." Sandra thought she was winning. She thought she'd already written the ending to our story. But she was wrong. Because the ending wasn't hers to write. It was mine. The days leading up to the second hearing blurred together, a mix of exhaustion and obsession. My kitchen table was no longer a place for meals but a war room. Binders stacked in neat towers, sticky notes marking key sections, highlighted text glowing under the lamp late into the night. Every evening after Lily went to bed, I became a different version of myself. Not just a mother, not just a teacher, but a strategist. I studied Sandra's every move like she was a subject in one of my old psychology textbooks. She thrived on control, on appearances, on convincing others she was the savior. If I was going to beat her, I had to pull the mask off in public, and make sure everyone saw what lay underneath. But the hardest part wasn't the documents, or the hours of sifting through old records. It was pretending everything was normal for Lily. One night, she climbed into my lap as I sat surrounded by papers. "Why do you have so many notebooks, Mom?" she asked, her curls tickling my chin. I closed the binder and smiled. "Because I want to make sure I remember everything about you. Every story, every silly moment. You're my whole world, Lily." She leaned her head on my chest, and for a moment, the war room disappeared. It was just us. But when she fell asleep against me, I looked back at the binders, my chest tightening. I wasn't just building a case. I was building a shield. Mark stopped by a few times, usually under the excuse of dropping off lesson plans or grading sheets. But he always lingered, eyeing the chaos on my table. "You've built a fortress," he said once, flipping through a binder. "This is airtight." "I hope so," I murmured, though doubt clawed at me. "Sandra's slippery. She'll twist anything she can." Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Then don't give her the chance. Present it clean, simple, undeniable." "And when you hit her with that recording," I snapped my eyes to his. "You told no one about that, right?" "Of course not," he said firmly. "But Aurora, you realize how damning that is. A recording of her bragging about taking your kid? That's not just evidence. That's the nail in the coffin." I wanted to believe him. But paranoia had become my constant companion. At night, I'd jolt awake, convinced Sandra was outside my door, ready to snatch Lily in the dark. I even changed the locks, something I never thought I'd do. Sandra didn't confront me directly during those weeks, but her presence was everywhere. She hovered at school pickup, always a few feet too close. She dropped off cookies at the apartment office with notes about Lily's favorite treats. She charmed neighbors, waving at them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then there was the worst moment. It was a Saturday morning. I was folding laundry when Lily ran in, clutching a crayon drawing. "Look, Mom. I drew our family." She held up a picture, me, her, and Sandra. All three of us standing hand in hand. My throat closed. "That's very nice, honey," I managed, my voice breaking. "She said we could be like two moms," Lily said innocently, before bouncing off to hang the drawing on the fridge. When the door closed behind her, I crumpled onto the bed, silent tears soaking the laundry in my lap. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about winning custody. Sandra was trying to rewrite Lily's reality. And if I didn't stop her, she might succeed. So I doubled down. I filed the complaint report from the foster girl into my binder. I organized the journals chronologically, cross-referencing them with Lily's medical and school records. I even added photos, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, first day of kindergarten, all with me at her side. Finally, I practiced. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at midnight, binder in hand, speaking aloud the way I would in court. My voice shook at first, but each night it grew steadier, stronger. "You've painted me as weak," I told my reflection, eyes burning. "But you don't know me. You don't know what a mother will do when her child is threatened." One night, I heard Lily whimpering in her sleep. I rushed into her room and found her curled tight, whispering, "Don't go, Mommy. Don't go." I crawled into bed beside her, holding her close. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. "Not ever." I meant it with every shred of my soul. By the time the hearing approached, I was ready. Not calm, not at peace, but ready. My fortress of binders stood tall. The recording sat safe on 2 separate USB drives, hidden in different places in the apartment. My nerves still rattled, but underneath them was steel. Sandra thought she'd broken me in the first round. She thought I'd crawl away quietly, let her win. But she'd made a mistake. She'd underestimated me. And in court, that mistake was going to cost her everything. The courthouse loomed like a fortress against the gray morning sky. Clouds hung heavy, pressing down on the city, as though even nature understood the weight of what was about to unfold inside. I held Lily's hand tightly as we walked up the steps. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies printed along the hem. I wanted her to look bright, untouched by the shadows Sandra had cast over us. Mark walked on my other side, not as my lawyer, he wasn't one, but as my steady anchor. He'd offered to come for support, and though part of me wanted to shield him from this storm, another part knew I couldn't face it alone. At the doors, I crouched down and looked Lily in the eyes. "Sweetheart, you'll sit with Mrs. Harper today, remember?" Mrs. Harper was a kind woman from our church who had agreed to keep Lily during the hearing. Lily nodded, but her little hand clutched mine tighter. "You'll come get me after, right?" "Always," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll never leave you, Lily. Not ever." When she walked away with Mrs. Harper, my chest ached. But I stood tall. This wasn't the time for tears. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low voices. Lawyers shuffled papers, the judge's clerk arranged files, and the stale scent of coffee lingered in the air. Sandra sat at the opposite table, perfectly composed. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her suit immaculate. She looked like the poster child for stability, warmth, authority. She even managed a small smile when she saw me, as if this were just another game she knew she was about to win. I sat at my table, sliding my binders into neat stacks, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the whole room could hear it. "All rise," the bailiff called, and the judge entered. The session began. Sandra's lawyer, a slick man with sharp features, wasted no time. He painted Sandra as a saint, the ever-present guardian who had stepped in where I had faltered. He recited a list of supposed instances of my negligence, times when Sandra had allegedly picked Lily up from school because I forgot, moments when Lily was left in distress until Sandra intervened. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, designed to cut me down with polite precision. I clenched my fists under the table. Lies. Twisted half-truths. He was building the illusion of a careless mother, and every time I wanted to shout, I bit my tongue and reminded myself, wait. Your turn is coming. Finally, it was. The judge turned to me. Ms. Carter, do you wish to respond? I stood, my knees trembling, but my voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. I opened the blue binder, sliding photographs across the table. These are school attendance records, medical notes, and personal logs I've kept since Lily was born. They show that I, not Sandra, have consistently cared for her. Every doctor visit. Every parent-teacher conference. Every milestone. The judge leaned forward, flipping through the papers. Sandra's lawyer objected. Your Honor, these could easily be fabricated after the fact. I expected that. I took a deep breath and gestured toward Mark. Mr. Reynolds, a colleague of mine, can verify the authenticity of these school records. As can the school administration, if the court wishes. The judge nodded. Duly noted. Sandra's smile faltered slightly. Just slightly, but I caught it. Next, I pulled out the red binder. This contains text messages exchanged between Sandra and me over the past 5 years. As you can see, she frequently offered to take Lily off my hands, not because I neglected her, but because Sandra insisted she wanted more time with her. I read aloud one message, "Don't worry about tonight, Aurora. I'll handle dinner. Lily's always happier at my place anyway." The words echoed in the courtroom. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Again, I continued, "This paints not a picture of me being absent, but of Sandra attempting to insert herself in parental decisions that weren't hers to make." The judge scribbled notes. Sandra's lawyer tried to regain control, but I pressed forward, heat rising in my chest. And finally, Your Honor, I said, reaching into my folder for the manila envelope, there is a prior complaint filed against Sandra Carter in her capacity as a foster parent. Sandra's head whipped toward me, her face draining of color. I laid the report on the table. A teenage foster child alleged verbal and emotional mistreatment while under Sandra's care. While the case was closed with only a warning, the record exists. It demonstrates a troubling pattern of behavior, control, manipulation, and emotional pressure. The judge raised an eyebrow. Is this verified? Yes, Your Honor, I said, sliding forward the copy with the official seal. Obtained through a source within social services. Sandra's lawyer leapt up. Objection. This is irrelevant. Overruled, the judge said sharply. We will review it. My heart hammered. I wasn't finished. I took out my phone, pulling up the recording, my hands trembling only slightly as I connected it to the courtroom speaker. And finally, Your Honor, I'd like to submit this audio recording. Sandra's eyes widened. The room filled with her voice, clear and smug. She doesn't stand a chance. Courts always trust me. Aurora's drowning. I'll have guardianship by summer. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The sound of her laughter, low, triumphant, hung in the air like poison. When it ended, silence reigned. The judge's gaze bore into Sandra, whose face had gone stiff, lips pressed into a thin line. I exhaled, forcing myself not to smile, not to collapse in relief. This wasn't over. But the tide had shifted. For the first time, Sandra didn't look invincible. She looked cornered. And I knew I wasn't done yet. The recording still echoed in my ears long after it stopped playing. Sandra's voice, mocking, arrogant, dripping with certainty, hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His gaze flicked from Sandra to me, then back to Sandra. The silence stretched long enough to make the entire courtroom restless. Even Sandra's lawyer shifted in his seat, tapping his pen against his notes. Ms. Carter, the judge finally said, his voice even, do you wish to respond to this recording? Sandra rose slowly, smoothing the lapel of her blazer. She looked calm, too calm. Your Honor, what you just heard was a private conversation, taken out of context. I was venting to a friend. Anyone who's been in a custody dispute knows how emotions run high. My words were careless, but they do not reflect my intentions. My only concern has always been Lily's well-being. Her lawyer nodded vigorously, as though he could will the explanation into truth. I clenched my fists beneath the table. She was good, too good. Even caught red-handed, she managed to twist herself into a victim, a misunderstood martyr. The judge, however, didn't immediately look convinced. His eyes lingered on Sandra a beat too long. Very well, he said at last. Ms. Aurora Carter, please take the stand. My legs felt heavy as I walked forward, the weight of every eye in the room pressing against me. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat, palms damp, heart thundering. Sandra's lawyer wasted no time. Ms. Carter, he began, voice smooth and cutting, you claim to be Lily's primary caregiver. Yet is it not true that your demanding work schedule has frequently forced you to rely on Sandra Carter for assistance? I met his gaze steadily. It is true that Sandra offered help, often insisting on it. But that does not mean I was absent. I adjusted my schedule, took unpaid leave when necessary, and sacrificed more than I can list to make sure Lily was cared for. Assistance does not equal abandonment. He narrowed his eyes. So you deny ever neglecting Lily? I deny ever neglecting my daughter, I said firmly, my voice echoing through the courtroom. He tried again and again, throwing twisted questions like daggers. Wasn't it true Sandra provided stability? Wasn't it true Lily seemed happy in her company? Didn't Lily draw pictures including Sandra and the family? Each time, I countered. Calm. Precise. The binders were my shield, the truth my sword. Finally, he smirked. Ms. Carter, if Sandra is so manipulative and controlling, why did you allow her so much access to Lily in the first place? The question stung. I paused, breathing deeply, feeling every eye bore into me. But then I lifted my chin. Because I trusted her, I said, my voice breaking just slightly before hardening again. Because I believed she cared about my daughter the way I did. Because when you're a single mother with no one else, and someone offers to help, you cling to that lifeline. I let her close because I thought she loved Lily. But I was wrong. She doesn't love Lily, she wants to possess her. And there's a difference. The silence that followed was electric. Sandra's lawyer faltered, then sat down. My attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who had been quietly letting me present my own evidence, rose. Ms. Carter, one last question. Why are you fighting so hard? What does Lily mean to you? I swallowed the lump in my throat, blinking back tears. Lily is everything, I whispered, then louder, stronger. She is my heartbeat, my purpose, my light. Every sacrifice I've made, every battle I've fought, has been for her. I'm not perfect, but I'm her mother. And no one will ever love her the way I do. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the hot streaks on my cheeks. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Sandra's mask cracked, her jaw tightened, her knuckles white against the table. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Carter. You may step down. I returned to my seat, trembling but lighter somehow, as though I had finally spoken the truth that had been burning inside me for months. The judge shuffled his papers, then looked at both sides. I have heard enough. We will now deliberate. The courtroom tensed. My heart pounded as the judge withdrew to chambers. Minutes stretched into eternity. I stared at the wood grain of the table, tracing patterns to distract myself from the terror clawing at my chest. What if it wasn't enough? What if Sandra still won? When the judge returned, the air shifted. Everyone rose, then sat again as he began to speak. "This case is not simple," he said. "We are not merely deciding between two caretakers, but between two very different narratives of Lily's life. On one hand, Ms. Sandra Carter presents herself as a stable, consistent presence. On the other, Ms. Aurora Carter demonstrates long-term, documented commitment as Lily's primary parent." My breath caught. The judge continued, his tone grave. "The court has reviewed the evidence presented, including documented records, prior complaints, and the submitted audio recording. While Ms. Sandra Carter may have provided assistance in the past, the evidence strongly suggests a pattern of overreach, manipulation, and intent to undermine Ms. Aurora Carter's parental role." Sandra's face drained of color. The judge's next words rang like a bell. "Therefore, guardianship will remain solely with Ms. Aurora Carter. Furthermore, this court advises restrictions on Sandra Carter's unsupervised access to Lily, pending further review." It felt like the world tilted. Relief crashed over me in waves so strong I could barely breathe. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched the edge of the table. Sandra shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. She can't raise that child alone." "Ms. Carter," the judge snapped, "you are out of order. Sit down." Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve, but Sandra's eyes locked on mine, blazing with fury. It wasn't over, not in her mind. But the verdict was in, and she had lost. I left the courthouse trembling, tears streaming down my face. Lily ran into my arms outside, and I lifted her high, spinning her as she giggled. "You're with me, baby," I whispered against her hair. "Always with me." And for the first time in months, I believed it. But as Sandra's glare burned into my back from the courthouse steps, I also knew this battle had ended, but the war might not be over. The days after the verdict felt unreal. For the first time in months, I woke up without the immediate fear that Lily could be taken from me. No looming court date, no binders stacked like barricades at the foot of my bed. The weight that had been crushing my chest finally lifted, replaced by a dizzying lightness I didn't quite know how to carry. But relief was complicated. Everywhere I went, I half expected Sandra to appear. At the grocery store. At school pickup. In the lobby of our apartment building. It was as though my mind couldn't believe she was truly gone from our lives. And in some ways, I wasn't wrong. Sandra didn't disappear. She lingered like smoke after a fire, less visible, but still choking the air. The first time I saw her after court, I was walking Lily home from school. Sandra was parked across the street in her car, engine running, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She didn't say a word. Just sat there, staring. "Mommy, why is Miss Sandra here?" Lily asked, tugging on my hand. I forced a smile. "She's just passing by, honey. Let's keep walking." My heart pounded until we reached our building. That night, I double-checked the locks again. A few days later, a neighbor mentioned Sandra had stopped by with cookies. Again. She'd left them with a note, thinking of Lily. "She'll always be like family to me." I tossed them straight into the trash, but the gesture gnawed at me. Sandra wasn't accepting her loss. She was circling, waiting for a weak moment. Mark noticed the shadows under my eyes. "You won," he reminded me one afternoon at school. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder." I gave him a tired smile. "You don't know Sandra. She doesn't stop until she gets what she wants." He leaned on the desk, lowering his voice. "Then maybe it's time you stop playing defense." The thought lingered with me. For months, I'd been reacting, scrambling, trying to survive Sandra's schemes. Now, for the first time, I had the upper hand. Maybe it was time to use it. Still, I tried to focus on Lily first. We started new routines: Saturday pancakes, evening walks, bedtime stories where the only villains were dragons and pirates. Slowly, her laughter grew freer, unburdened. One night, she whispered, "I'm glad it's just us again, Mommy." I hugged her tighter than ever. Me too, baby. Me too. But peace never lasted long. One morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a photo of Lily playing on the schoolyard, taken from a distance. No note. No explanation. Just the photo. My blood ran cold. I took it to the police, but without a direct threat, they shrugged. "We'll keep a record," the officer said. "But nothing we can act on right now." That night, I sat awake in the living room, staring at the photo under the dim light. Sandra wasn't just sulking. She was sending a message. "I'm still watching." Mark was furious when I told him. "She's crossing a line," he growled. "You need to push back harder. File a restraining order." I hesitated. Part of me feared poking the bear. Another part knew Sandra wouldn't stop unless she was forced. So I documented everything: the photo, the parked car, the cookies, even the way Lily sometimes mentioned things Sandra had told her in passing. "Miss Sandra said she'll always be close by," she chirped once, not realizing how those words froze my blood. Weeks stretched on. The intensity of Sandra's presence wavered. Sometimes she vanished for days, other times she loomed close, circling our world like a hawk. But I learned to breathe through it. To hold Lily tighter, to rebuild my life one small piece at a time. I poured energy back into teaching, rediscovering the joy of the classroom. I laughed with Mark in the teacher's lounge, shared coffee breaks that turned into something warmer, though neither of us named it yet. I started writing again in my journals, not out of fear, but out of habit, a way to remember the good alongside the bad. And still, Sandra lingered. The final straw came on a crisp autumn evening. Lily and I returned home to find our apartment door scratched, a single word carved into the wood with something sharp: "Mine." Lily gasped. "Mommy, who did that?" My hands trembled as I ushered her inside, locking the door. "Just some kids playing a bad joke," I lied, forcing calm into my voice. But rage burned in my chest. This wasn't a game anymore. Sandra wasn't just watching, she was claiming. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the carved word in my mind. For months, I had been fighting to hold on to Lily, to defend myself against Sandra's lies. But now? Now it was time to end it. Sandra wanted a game. Fine. But she was about to learn the one rule she had never understood: you don't play games with a mother who has nothing left to lose. The word carved into my door haunted me for days: mine. Sandra wasn't going to stop. Court had stripped her of guardianship, but she wasn't after paperwork anymore. She wanted ownership of Lily, of me, of the story itself. And unless I ended it, she would keep circling, poisoning every corner of our lives. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide behind binders and legal shields anymore. If Sandra wanted a stage, I'd build one for her, and make sure she burned on it. I spent 2 nights preparing. Copies of the police reports. Photos of the carved door. The envelope with Lily's playground picture. And, most important, a second recording, one I'd captured during Sandra's little car stakeout. Mark had helped me angle my phone camera through the blinds when we spotted her parked outside again. Sandra had been on the phone, her voice smug, venomous. "She thinks she's safe now. But Lily loves me more. It's only a matter of time before she realizes where she belongs." That was all I needed. The following Sunday, our church hosted its fall festival, a community event Sandra never missed. Dozens of families, neighbors, and teachers gathered under string lights and hay bales. Children played in bounce houses while parents mingled over cider and donuts. The perfect, wholesome stage. Lily skipped ahead, laughing with her friends. I kept my eyes on Sandra across the lawn. She was holding court with a group of parents, her voice sweet, her smile radiant. To anyone watching, she looked like the pillar of warmth and generosity. Perfect. I walked straight to the microphone on the small stage set up for announcements. My voice rang out, steady and sharp, "Good evening, everyone. I have something important to share about safety in our community." Heads turned. Even Sandra's. I held up the carved photo of my door, the word "mine" visible under the floodlights. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "This was left on my apartment door last week," I said. "And a photo of my daughter was delivered to me, without my knowledge of who took it." These weren't isolated events. They were part of a pattern of harassment. Gasps. Parents exchanged uneasy looks. Sandra stiffened, color draining from her face. I clicked my phone, and her voice spilled out over the speaker system, projected for everyone. "She thinks she's safe now. But Lily loves me more. It's only a matter of time before she realizes where she belongs." The crowd froze. The words hung like poison smoke. Sandra's mask shattered. "No," she shouted, stumbling forward. That was taken out of, but whispers surged through the crowd, disgusted, horrified. Parents shielded their children, stepping back. Someone muttered, "God, she's obsessed." I didn't need to say anything else. Sandra's reputation was bleeding out in front of everyone. Her power, the charm, the illusion, gone. I leaned toward the mic, my voice calm, almost icy. Sandra wanted a game. But games have rules. And one of them is knowing when you've lost. The crowd parted as police officers, already alerted with my evidence packet earlier that day, approached. Sandra screamed, tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. They led her away as the whispers swelled, and I stood there in the lights, not triumphant, not gloating, just steady. Because justice wasn't always about winning in court. Sometimes, it was about stripping a predator of their mask in front of everyone they'd fooled. That night, when I tucked Lily into bed, she asked sleepily, "Is Miss Sandra gone now?" I smoothed her hair, kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby. She's gone." And in the silence that followed, for the first time in what felt like forever, I truly believed it. And that's how Sandra's little game ended, not with her winning custody, not with her playing savior, but with her mask ripped off in front of everyone. But now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have kept it quiet in court, or gone savage in public like I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I read them all. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good revenge tale, and subscribe so you never miss the next twist. Trust me, you won't want to.